8. Antoine Sims. In August of 2022, police in Kennesaw, Georgia responded to an unusual report when a man called 911 over his dissatisfaction with his McDonald's order. They arrived at the restaurant to find 24-year-old Antoine Sims accusing the manager of serving cold fries, handling food without gloves, and failing to give him a receipt. Prior to the officer's arrival, the agreement had erupted into a shouting match. Body cam footage captured an officer's conversation with Sims, who described his fries as lukewarm but not hot. He claimed that the manager got confrontational and told him to leave the property when he requested fresh fries and asked for a receipt for the second time. The manager accused Sims of being aggressive and refusing to leave the property and wanted him removed for trespassing. At the manager's request, the officer issued Sims a criminal trespass notice, which does not come with criminal charges. Just when it seemed like the situation was almost resolved, the police ran the disgruntled customer's ID and discovered a warrant for murder dating back to 2018. Something that law enforcement had somehow missed until then, even though Sims had been arrested since the murder and was wearing an ankle monitor. He led the officers on a 20-minute foot chase before being apprehended and taken to the Cobb County Jail, where he awaits the next step in his case. 7. Marissa Anderson. While working the morning shift as an emergency dispatcher in Door County, Wisconsin one day in 2023, Marissa Anderson picked up a call and recited the standard greeting. 911, what is the address of your emergency? The person on the other end yelled, "Mom." It was one of Marissa's children. She was initially unable to process the fact that she was taking a call from one of her own kids, and she repeatedly asked the caller for the address of their emergency. Marissa eventually realized she was talking to her son, Landon, who told her that the family's home in Forestville was on fire. Landon and his sister Emma had evacuated through a window and were watching helplessly as their house burned. After dispatching a fire crew to the scene, Marissa rushed home. She arrived 10 minutes later to find her home engulfed in flames. Thankfully, Marissa's children were safe, but her 4 cats, 3 dogs, and pet rabbit all perished in the blaze. Speaking to the Washington Post from her hotel room, the displaced mother of 2 said that in the 2 years she'd been working as a dispatcher, she never expected to take a call about a major emergency at her own residence. Landon and Emma had awoken to the sound of shattering glass shortly after Marissa left for work that morning. Her husband wasn't home at the time. Marissa collapsed on the lawn as the gravity of the disaster sank in. It took firefighters 2 hours to put the fire out, and almost everything in the house was destroyed. The cause of the fire is believed to be electrical. According to the most recent update on the family's unfortunate situation, Marissa and her husband were still trying to decide whether to demolish or renovate what's left of their beloved home. 6. Tali Campbell. In early June of 2023, Tali Campbell received a series of terrifying text messages from her husband, Qualin, one of which contained a photo of a man she didn't recognize sitting in the passenger seat of his car, along with a message stating 911. Tali dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that she believed her husband was being held hostage in Colorado Springs. After communicating that she needed someone to check on Qualin, she drove to his location herself. Tali found her husband's car in a parking garage, where he was slumped over from a fatal gunshot wound. She had dialed 911 roughly an hour earlier, and yet there were no emergency responders at the scene, even though the incident happened just a mile, 1.6 kilometers away from police headquarters. In a bizarre twist, the man in the photo that Qualin had sent to Tali was also found dead. Police identified him as 44-year-old David Carrolls. Tali is demanding answers about why it took so long for help to arrive at the scene. She believes Qualin might still be alive if emergency responders had arrived sooner. The police department has declined to comment on the matter, citing an ongoing investigation. But a spokesperson has revealed that Qualin's death is being investigated as a homicide, while Carroll's death is believed to be self-inflicted. According to the Campbell family's attorney, It's believed that Carroll's was homeless and that Quallen either picked him up in his company vehicle or he got into the car some other way. As far as anyone can tell, the two men didn't know each other, and Quallen appears to have been targeted at random. 5. Bizarre family vacation. In October 2022, 911 dispatchers in Fremont, Michigan, received a strange call from a 51-year-old local resident named Anthony Carigliano. He stated that he needed police protection immediately and asked to speak with a police officer and U.S. authorities. The conversation only got more bizarre as Carigliano mentioned the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center towers and claimed that he had to discuss something of vital national interest. He also expressed a fear that someone wanted to erase him from the face of the earth, insisting he wasn't crazy, and made other paranoid statements. Officers visited Anthony's home, where he lived with his wife, Suzette, their 2 teenage sons, and Suzette's mother. After concluding that Anthony's behavior was puzzling but not dangerous to himself or others, the police left the scene. A few nights later, Anthony's mother-in-law was found wandering in the street in a confused state. Anthony, Suzette, and their sons were nowhere to be found, prompting law enforcement to appeal to the public for information on the family's whereabouts. The Cariglianos were found 450 miles, 724 kilometers away in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. They were safe, but still acting strangely. A gas station manager who spotted the family in Gulliver, Wisconsin, told the U.S. Sun that one of the boys had asked to use a phone, but couldn't figure out how to use it. She said that she didn't think the other family members knew he was trying to call someone, and she didn't know who he was trying to reach or why. Police interviewed the family and learned that they all still thought people were after them, but determined that they didn't meet the criteria for being taken into protective custody. In other words, there was no actual evidence that someone was after the Cariglianos. What made the case even more puzzling was the fact that the family had no documented history of mental illness or any other major issues that might have put them on law enforcement's radar. They kept to themselves and didn't interact with their neighbors much, but by all appearances, they seemed to be a totally normal family. After determining that the Cariglianos meant no harm by leaving behind Suzette's mother, authorities declined to charge them with any crimes. The circumstances surrounding their bizarre family trip remain unclear to this day. 4. Texas shooter terrorizes family. One evening in April 2023, tragedy struck a family. 16 members of an extended family were gathered at the Cleveland, Texas home of Sonia Guzman and her husband, Wilson Garcia, when someone began shooting a gun near the house. It's not an uncommon occurrence in Texas, but the gunfire was extremely close to the home. A family member went outside and politely asked the shooter, later identified as 38-year-old Francisco Oropesa, to move further away from the home. Oropesa refused, so Garcia and his family began calling the police. They called repeatedly as the situation became increasingly urgent. Before police arrived, Oropesa entered Garcia's home and began shooting his AK-47 style rifle at the people inside. At one point, Garcia was told by a 911 dispatcher that police were already at the scene, causing him to ask why the gunman was in his house killing his family. In fact, Oropesa had enough time to kill 5 members of Garcia's family, including his wife Sonia, before fleeing the scene. Sonia's brother said that he had hid in a closet and repeatedly dialed 911. He also instructed a relative who was not in the home at the time to do the same. Now the family's left with questions about the confusing and slow police response. Oropesa was captured just a handful of miles away following a days-long manhunt, thanks to a tip that was called into the FBI. He faces 5 counts of murder and is being held on $5 million bail. 3. Terry Clark. Sometimes when a 911 dispatcher receives a call from a family member, they don't immediately realize who they're talking to. But Terry Clark knew right away when she heard her teenage daughter, Tanya Hill's voice on the other line. While working as a dispatcher in New Orleans, the young woman was calling from inside a walk-in freezer at a McDonald's restaurant, where she and her coworkers had been taken hostage during their after-school shift. Tanya had only been working at the restaurant for about a week when the harrowing call came in. As Terry listened to her panicked daughter begging her to send someone to the scene, she maintained her professionalism, knowing that it was the quickest and most effective way to get help to the restaurant. It was later learned that a woman had entered the McDonald's and forced Tanya and her co-workers into the freezer at gunpoint. Once they were locked inside, Tanya dialed 911. She didn't realize her mother was working overtime and was both surprised and comforted to hear Terry's voice. Terry later told the Washington Post that she stayed as calm as possible while tears rolled down her face. She credited her many years on the job, calming down other parents, with giving her the skills she needed to remain composed during the most emotionally challenging call she had ever taken. Police responded to the scene and freed Tanya and her work crew. Both Tanya and Terry were left so shaken by the incident that Tanya stopped going to work and Terry considered retiring. And while they faced a long road to healing from the mental trauma, the ordeal brought them closer together. 2. Central Park Karen. A New York City resident named Amy Cooper became infamously known as the Central Park Karen after she dialed 911 and made false allegations against a black man who was birdwatching one day in 2020. The incident reportedly began when the man, named Christian Cooper, no relation, politely asked Cooper to leash her dog in an area of the park where doing so is required in order to protect wildlife. Amy allegedly refused to leash her dog and instead chose to argue with Christian. It wasn't the first time Christian had encountered dog owners who refused to leash their pets in accordance with the park's rules. In fact, he made it a habit to carry dog treats, which he fed to unleashed dogs. He did this because he had noticed that dog walkers tend to distrust strangers, and it seemed to encourage them to leash their free-roaming pets. Christian gave a treat to Amy's dog, and as you've probably already guessed, this only served to further infuriate her. As Christian began recording the interaction with his cell phone, Amy pulled hers out and dialed 911. She falsely claimed that she and her dog were being threatened. According to the NYPD, both parties had left the scene by the time officers responded to the call. Amy was ultimately charged with filing a false police report, but this was arguably the least severe of the consequences she experienced as a result of her reckless behavior. Christian posted the video he had recorded at the park on social media, and it quickly garnered tens of millions of views, forever branding Amy as the Central Park Karen. Amy lost her job and sued for wrongful termination, but the case was dismissed. She appealed the case, and it was dismissed again, making it clear that the way she acted will not be tolerated in the Big Apple. 1. The pink pork debacle. When a customer noticed that her order of pulled pork from the famous Clyde Cooper's barbecue restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina was pink one day in 2022, she expressed some concerns to the owners. It's understandable, since eating undercooked pork can cause severe illness or even death. But when the owners reassured the woman that they had slow roasted the meat over a 12-hour period and that it was fully cooked, she didn't believe them. In fact, she was so convinced that her pork was dangerous that she demanded that the owners cook it more or give her a refund. By then, they had already replaced the pork with chicken. The customer nevertheless dialed 911, and the dispatcher sent a deputy to the restaurant. But not much came of the situation. After listening to both sides of the story, the deputy left the scene. The incident went viral, sparking a heated debate over why the woman's pork was pink and if it was safe to eat. Meat science expert Dana Hansen told the Washington Post that barbecuing affects a protein called myoglobin differently than other methods of cooking. For example, when you grill a piece of meat, you can gauge its doneness based on its color. This is because the grilling process denatures the myoglobin, causing it to eventually turn brown. But barbecuing does not have the same effect, especially because the smoking process causes chemicals to bind to the meat, locking in its pink and red hues. This and other visual cues are actually considered signs of authenticity among barbecue snobs, according to the Post. But as you've learned today, it left one woman feeling so uncomfortable that she sought emergency help. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be accused of misusing 911 over a situation that you truly believed was serious, or of failing to dial 911 when you had an obligation to do so but didn't realize how serious the situation was? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.